What's even more surprising is the significance of the smaller of the two islands in the loch.
What's the name of the wee island?
Eilean na Corley, which is Gaelic for the Council Island, and that's where they had their council meetings, and that's where the administration of the Isles took place. Every summer, vast numbers of people came here, and they could see their betters meeting on the island, but yet they couldn't actually get in the way. They had to see it all from a distance.
This is really Parliament. It's a government, is it not?
This lordship of the MacDonalds was like a separate state, which had the same sort of government apparatus as other great states in Europe. And it's what really marks out the importance of the lordship.
Does the lordship, in a sense, represent an alternative Scotland?
The Gaelic title, Lord of the Isles, can also be translated as King of the Isles. They saw themselves as a Celtic society, and more importantly, I think that they were challenging the Stuarts as being potential kings for the whole of Scotland.
The Lords of the Isles had a deeply troubled relationship with the Stuart kings of Scotland, who were intent on imposing their authority on the whole country. But the MacDonalds' formidable military strength allowed them to keep the crown at bay.
Being a thorn in the side of the Scottish kings was almost second nature to the Lords of the Isles, who saw themselves as independent in their own right and did everything in their power to stay that way. This struggle for independence came to a head in 1462, when John MacDonald, the fourth Lord of the Isles and chief of Clan Donald, entered into an alliance with Scotland's #1 enemy.
England was at war with Scotland. John MacDonald made a secret pact to support the English against the Scots. This reckless alliance would trigger a bitter family feud. It was here, at Bloody Bay, just off the coast of Mull, that John MacDonald clashed with his son and heir, Angus Og. Historian Donald William Stewart has researched how their struggle ultimately led to the demise of Clan Donald's lordship of the Isles.
Wonderful view. Ardnamurchan all the way along here. We've got Banhiant, the sacred mountain over there, and down here we've got Bloody Bay.
500 years ago, this seemingly peaceful stretch of water would have been a scene of total carnage, as father and son fought each other for the very soul of Clan Donald.
Donald William, what on earth were the Lords of the Isles doing in supporting the ancient enemy England?
Well, it's one of these things in history which seemed a very good idea at the time, but, you know, looking back at it, maybe it wasn't such a good idea after all. Both sides had very good reasons for making a treaty at the time. The King of England, while he was planning an invasion, he needed help in the north of Scotland. Who better to give him help in the north of Scotland than the Lord of the Isles?
But surely John, Lord of the Isles, was a traitor at this time.
Really, you could say what the Lord of the Isles was doing was merely trying to protect his own state, if you like, or a state within a state, against a very aggressive and perhaps rather brutal bunch of gangsters down in Edinburgh that were trying to take it away from him.
Did John, Lord of the Isles, pay any penalty for this treachery?
Yeah, well, the King of Scotland, James III, and the King of England, Edward IV, they had a sort of love-in the early 1470s. Edward IV decided to dob in the Lord of the Isles. Lord of the Isles was found out. King of Scots had to do something about it. He was stripped of his titles and very much put under the thumb of the King of Scotland. And also, henceforth, the title, the Lord of the Isles, was now in the power of the King of Scots to grant and not in the power of the islanders themselves. That was a big change. He fell out with an awful lot of people in the lordship, most notably his own son, Angus Og MacDonald. Angus drove him out of the house and, oral tradition tells us, made his father sleep under an old rotten boat on the seashore. Things had got that bad.
Where does Angus fit into this picture? Is he trying to take over the role of Lord of the Isles?
Yes, it was getting to the point where he was seeing his inheritance just being taken away from him piece by piece.
So Clan Donald is deeply divided at this point, with father and son at each other's throats.
Yeah, the tensions grow, and this is where it all explodes. The Battle of Bloody Bay. One of the greatest sea battles that Scotland has ever seen. Perhaps one of the greatest sea battles of its time in the whole of Western Europe.
And who won?
In a sense, Angus Og MacDonald won because he beat his father. But the long-term losers were Clan Donald as a whole. There's a lot of very expensive, state-of-the-art medieval naval technology at the bottom of this bay.
It's estimated the MacDonalds lost up to half of their fleet at the Battle of Bloody Bay. And with the loss of this naval might, the lordship of the Isles would never be the same again. Without the backing of his clan, John remained Lord of the Isles only in name. Angus Og continued his campaign to reclaim his inheritance for another 10 years, but in 1490 he was mysteriously murdered in his sleep. His body was brought to Iona, the spiritual and intellectual centre of the Lordship of the Isles. It's here that the mighty chiefs of Clan Donald are buried, and, many believe, the great Somerled himself.
In ancient times, funeral processions carried the dead along this road, which is still called the Way of the Dead, up here to the burial ground of Relig Oran. Now, St Oran's Chapel is a very beautiful, very simple building overlooking the Sound of Iona, and traditionally it's here that the great MacDonald chiefs, the Lords of the Isles, had their final resting place.
But John MacDonald never made this journey. In 1493, he was finally stripped of his title by the King of Scotland. Poverty-stricken, the fourth and last Lord of the Isles died a few years later in Dundee, far from Clan Donald's ancestral heartland.
These are some of the grave slabs of the Lords of the Isles. And here's a great sword, and up here a traditional symbol of their sea power, a Highland galley. But of course, John MacDonald, the very last Lord of the Isles, never made it here to lie amongst the bones of his ancestors. And somehow this exile and death, if you like, symbolises for me not just the end of a great dynasty, but the end of the possibility or dream of a Gaelic-centred, Gaelic-speaking Scotland.
But the story of Clan Donald didn't end here. Somerled's ancestors still gather from all over the world to celebrate their ties of kinship here on the Isle of Skye.
I've always wanted to come back here since I was a wee chap, even though I live on the other side of the world.
This is our ancestral home, and when we come here to the Isle of Skye, why, we feel that we've come home.
These men are the current chiefs of Clan Donald. Recent genetic research suggests that 1 in 4 MacDonalds can trace their origins back to Somerled.
I am actually a direct descendant from Somerled, King of the Isles.
How are you sure that you are related to him?
Well, I know that I'm related to Somerled through, I had agreed to have a DNA test and was quite relieved to know that I'm related to Somerled.
Only one man, Genghis Khan, has more living descendants. The MacDonalds are no longer a great power, but they remain perhaps the most famous and certainly the largest of all the Highland clans.
Do you know how many MacDonalds there are worldwide?
Millions, 3 million.
15 million. It is by far the largest clan.
We're everywhere.
And 800 years after he conquered the West, perhaps this is the most lasting legacy of the King of the Isles.
Next week, the story of the MacLeods at the same time, 8 o'clock on Monday, here on BBC Two Scotland.